What happens when a species that evolved from persistence hunters, creatures so stubborn they once chased mammoths across continents until the beasts collapsed from exhaustion, decides that their little blue planet is worth fighting for? The Zephyrian Collective learned this lesson the hard way. They had conquered 47 star systems, enslaved dozens of species, and built an empire spanning 3 galaxy arms. Their military doctrine was flawless, their technology superior, their victory assured. After all, how hard could it be to subdue one primitive world on the galaxy's outer rim? They called it Operation Clean Sweep, a simple 3-day campaign to harvest Earth's resources and relocate its population to labor camps. The humans, they calculated, would surrender after the first demonstration of superior firepower. It was standard procedure, proven across countless worlds. But the Zephyrians made one critical error in their calculations. They assumed humans were like every other species they had encountered. They assumed humans were rational. This is the story of how humanity taught the galaxy that some things are worth more than survival, and why you should never ever underestimate a species that considers spite a valid military strategy. Admiral Zexai stood on the command deck of the Eternal Dominion, his 6 eyes focused on the blue-green marble spinning lazily in the viewscreen. The planet Earth looked peaceful from this distance, its white clouds swirling over vast oceans and brown-green continents. It was almost beautiful, in a primitive sort of way. Status report, Zexai commanded, his translator converting his clicking mandibles into the standard galactic tongue. All fleet elements in position, Admiral, replied his tactical officer, a young Zephyrian whose carapace still gleamed with the bright colors of inexperience. 700 vessels of the 3rd Conquest Fleet, ready to commence Operation Clean Sweep on your order. Zexai nodded, satisfied. 700 ships, more than enough to subdue this backwater world. The humans hadn't even achieved faster than light travel yet. Their most advanced weapons were chemical explosives and primitive nuclear devices. This would be over before the planet completed another rotation. Communications, have we received a response to our surrender demand? The communications officer's antennae twitched nervously. Yes, Admiral. The humans have responded through multiple channels. I have translated the most common response. Display it. Text appeared on the main screen, go F*** yourself, bugface. The bridge fell silent. Zexai blinked all 6 eyes in sequence, a sign of confusion among his species. In 43 years of military service, he had never encountered such a response to a surrender demand. Is this accurate? He asked. I ran it through the translation matrix 17 times, sir. The meaning is consistent across all human languages. They appear to be declining our generous offer. Zexai's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. How quaint. They think they can resist the might of the Zephyrian Collective. He turned to his tactical officer. Begin the demonstration. Target their largest population center, what do they call it? New York City, Admiral. Excellent. One precision strike should convince them of the futility of resistance. Fire when ready. The massive ship's primary weapon charged with a low hum that vibrated through the hull. Energy readings spiked as the ship's fusion cores channeled power to the main cannon. This weapon had cracked moons, turned entire cities to glass. One shot would vaporize several square kilometers and send a very clear message to the humans. The beam lanced down from orbit, a pillar of superheated plasma that should have carved through the atmosphere like a knife through soft tissue. But something impossible happened. The beam struck an energy barrier that suddenly materialized over the city, a shimmering dome of golden light that deflected the planet-killer weapon harmlessly into space. What just happened? Zexai's voice carried a note of disbelief. Unknown, sir. Our sensors detected no defensive installations on the planet's surface. No energy signatures that would indicate shield technology. Down on Earth, in a secret bunker beneath the Colorado mountains, Dr. Sarah Chen was having a very bad day. She had been working on experimental energy shield technology for the past 15 years, and it had never, not once, worked properly. The best she had managed was keeping a small force field active for 37 seconds before the entire system overloaded. But, when the first alien ships had appeared in orbit 3 days ago, something extraordinary had happened. The moment she activated the shield generator in response to the alien ultimatum, it had worked perfectly. Not just her prototype, every experimental defense system on the planet had suddenly started functioning exactly as designed. Railguns that had been plagued with power supply issues were now firing perfectly. Fusion reactors that had been theoretical were now producing clean, limitless energy. It was as if the universe itself had decided that humanity needed to level up immediately. "Ma'am," called out Lieutenant Rodriguez from the communications station. "We're getting reports from SHIELD installations worldwide. Beijing, London, Moscow, Tokyo, all shields are operating at 100% efficiency. The aliens' attack didn't even cause a fluctuation in our power grid." Dr. Chen stared at the readings on her screen. According to every law of physics she knew, what was happening was impossible. But the data didn't lie. Somehow, humanity's desperation had unlocked something that their scientists had been struggling with for decades. "Get me the president," she said quietly. "Tell him the shields are holding, but I have no idea how or why." Above Earth's atmosphere, Admiral Zexhai was beginning to understand that this operation was not going to proceed according to plan. "Admiral," his sensor operator called out, "I'm detecting massive energy buildups across the planet's surface. Multiple installations are powering weapons systems." "Impossible. Our intelligence indicated they possessed no significant military technology." "Sir, I'm reading energy signatures consistent with Varangian plasma cannons, Kellish particle beam arrays, and—" "Admiral, some of these readings don't match anything in our database." Zexhai's confidence was beginning to waver. The Varangians had been a spacefaring species for 3,000 years before the collective had conquered them. How could a primitive species have developed equivalent technology? His question was answered when the first human weapons opened fire. The plasma bolts that erupted from Earth's surface were crude compared to Zephyrian technology, raw, unrefined, and completely without the elegant efficiency that marked advanced civilizations. But they hit with the force of falling stars. The lead destroyer, the Swift Retribution, took a direct hit to its main reactor. The ship simply vanished in a ball of expanding gas and debris. "Evasive maneuvers!" Zexhai shouted. "All ships, defensive positions." But the humans weren't finished. From hidden installations across 6 continents, weapons that had no business existing began firing in coordinated salvos. Railguns launched tungsten slugs at significant fractions of light speed. Particle beams carved through the vacuum with deadly precision. And, from the dark side of Earth's moon, something that could only be described as a stupidly large laser began charging with the power output of a small star. The Zephyrian fleet, veterans of dozens of planetary conquests, found themselves under attack by weapons that violated their understanding of human capabilities. Ships that had survived battles against technologically advanced civilizations were being damaged by what should have been primitive technology. "Admiral," his communications officer called out. "We're receiving another transmission from the humans." "Put it through." This time, instead of text, a video feed appeared on the main screen. It showed a middle-aged human male in some kind of military uniform, sitting behind a desk with flags visible in the background. The human looked directly into the camera with what Zexhai was beginning to recognize as a distinctly human expression, one that somehow managed to convey amusement, determination, and barely controlled violence all at once. "Hello there," the human said, his voice carrying the casual tone one might use to greet a neighbor. "I'm President Harrison, and I represent the people of Earth. I understand you gentlemen came here expecting us to surrender. I've got some bad news for you on that front." The human paused, and his smile grew wider, an expression that, on any other species, might have seemed friendly. On humans, Zexhai was learning, it was deeply unsettling. "You see, we humans have a bit of a problem with authority figures telling us what to do. We've got a long history of it, actually. We once fought a war because someone tried to tax our tea without asking nicely. We fought wars over the right to elect our own leaders, over the right to practice our own religions, and, once memorably, over whether people should be allowed to own other people. Spoiler alert, we decided they shouldn't. The human's expression hardened slightly. Now you show up at our planet, uninvited, and demand that we surrender our world and our freedom. Did you really think we were going to say yes? Admiral Zexai found himself leaning forward despite himself. There was something in the human's tone that demanded attention. But, here's what's really going to ruin your day, President Harrison continued. About 6 months ago, our scientists started making breakthrough after breakthrough in fields where we'd been stuck for decades. Fusion power, directed energy weapons, gravitational manipulation, things that had been theoretical became practical almost overnight. We couldn't explain it then, and we still can't now. But, I'll tell you what we think happened. The president's smile vanished entirely. We think the universe looked at humanity, a species that once killed mammoths by following them around until they died of exhaustion, a species that fights wars over abstract principles, a species that has never, in its entire history, met a challenge it didn't try to overcome and decided we needed better tools. So here's my counterproposal, Admiral. You can take your fleet and leave our solar system. Right now. Today. And we'll pretend this unfortunate misunderstanding never happened. Or, and now the human's voice carried a note that made Zexai's carapace shiver, you can stay and find out exactly why the universe apparently thinks we need planet-killer weapons and gravity bombs. Your choice. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Eternal Dominion in absolute silence. Admiral Zexai stared at the blank screen, his tactical mind racing through possibilities. Everything about this situation was wrong. Primitive species were supposed to surrender when faced with overwhelming force. They were supposed to recognize their own limitations and submit to superior technology and training. They weren't supposed to develop impossible weapons overnight and issue ultimatums to vastly superior fleets. Admiral, his tactical officer whispered, "What are your orders?" Zexai looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These were seasoned veterans who had served in dozens of campaigns. He could see the same confusion and growing unease in their expressions that he felt himself. But retreat was not an option. The collective had never retreated from a primitive world. His superiors would not accept failure, especially not failure against a species that hadn't even achieved interstellar travel a week ago. "Signal all ships," he said finally. "We proceed with the operation. Full fleet engagement. If the humans want a war, they shall have one." As the Zephyrian fleet began to assume battle formations, Admiral Zexai tried to ignore the growing certainty that he had just made a terrible mistake. Below them, Earth continued its lazy rotation, looking as peaceful as ever. But now Zexai could see the faint glints of light on the dark side, installations that hadn't been there a week ago, weapons that couldn't exist but somehow did. The humans had rejected his surrender demand, developed impossible technology, and issued a counter-ultimatum to one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy. By every measure of military science and interstellar politics, it was the action of a suicidal species. But, as Admiral Zexai watched more human weapons installations power up across the planet's surface, he began to suspect that humanity's definition of suicide might be significantly different from everyone else's. The battle began at 0347 Greenwich Mean Time, when Admiral Zexai finally lost patience with the impossible situation and ordered a full fleet assault on Earth's surface. What followed would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy as a textbook example of how everything that could go wrong in an invasion could go wrong simultaneously. The Zephyrian Third Fleet had been designed to overwhelm planetary defenses through sheer firepower and superior technology. 700 ships, each one capable of reducing a city to rubble, descended toward Earth in perfect formation. Their weapons charged, their shields at maximum power, their crews confident that whatever tricks the humans had used earlier would crumble before sustained assault. They were about to discover that human ingenuity, when properly motivated, could be genuinely terrifying. The first hint that something was wrong came when the fleet's navigation systems began reporting impossible readings. Ships that should have been flying in straight lines toward their targets found themselves suddenly off course, their instruments indicating they were traveling in directions that didn't exist according to three-dimensional space. "Admiral," the navigation officer called out, his voice tight with confusion, "I'm showing our position as inside out." "That's not possible, sir." Before Zexai could respond, space itself seemed to fold around the lead attack squadrons. Ships that had been flying in perfect formation suddenly found themselves scattered across thousands of kilometers of space, their relative positions shuffled like cards in a deck. Worse, some ships were now flying backwards, their forward weapons pointing away from Earth while their engines pushed them toward the planet.
"What is happening?" Zexhai demanded. "Unknown, sir.
It appears to be some kind of gravitational weapon, but the readings don't match anything in our database. It's as if spacetime itself is being manipulated on a massive scale." Down on Earth, Dr. Chen was having another very bad day that was somehow also the best day of her scientific career.
The gravitational manipulation device she was operating had been theoretical yesterday. Today, it was reshuffling an alien invasion fleet like a cosmic shell game.
"Status report," she called out to her team. "Gravity bombs are functioning at 200% efficiency," reported Dr. Yamamoto from his station.
"Spatial distortion fields are stable. And, somehow, we're not creating any paradoxes or tearing holes in reality.
I've run the calculations 6 times, and, according to physics, what we're doing should be impossible."
"Well, someone forgot to tell physics, Dr."
Chen replied, watching as another squadron of alien ships suddenly found themselves flying in a perfect spiral pattern, their formation completely disrupted.
"Keep it up. The longer we can keep them confused, the better."
But the Zephyrians were not easily discouraged. Admiral Zexhai quickly adapted to the new situation, ordering his ships to spread out and attack independently rather than maintaining formation. If the humans could manipulate spacetime, then predictable patterns were clearly a liability. "All ships, scatter and engage at will," he commanded.
"Independent targeting, maximum firepower.
Overwhelm their defenses through sheer volume of fire." It was a sound tactical decision that should have worked against any rational opponent. Unfortunately for Admiral Zexhai, he was fighting humans, and humans had never been particularly interested in being rational. The scattered Zephyrian ships began their bombardment of Earth's surface, expecting to overwhelm the planet's defenses through sustained fire. Instead, they encountered something that would later be termed aggressive defensive systems in military reports. The human shield generators didn't just deflect incoming fire, they absorbed it, converted it to usable energy, and fed it back into Earth's weapon systems.
Every plasma bolt that struck the shields made the human weapons more powerful.
Every missile that impacted the barriers added to humanity's ammunition stores. The Zephyrians weren't attacking Earth, they were charging its batteries. "Sir," the tactical officer reported with growing alarm, "the humans' weapon output is increasing proportionally to our rate of fire. The more we shoot at them, the stronger they get."
Admiral Zexhai felt something that he hadn't experienced in his 43-year military career: genuine fear.
Not fear of death, that was a constant companion in any military operation, but fear of the unknown.
Fear of facing an opponent that didn't follow any logical rules of engagement. "Cease bombardment," he ordered.
"All ships, defensive positions." But the humans weren't finished with their surprises. As the Zephyrian ships pulled back to regroup, Earth's moon suddenly moved. Not in its orbit, the entire moon simply shifted position, relocating itself between the alien fleet and Earth like a massive shield. At the same time, weapons installations that had been hidden in lunar craters became active, adding their firepower to Earth's defensive network.
"How did they move their moon?"
Zexhai asked the question to nobody in particular, his voice carrying the tone of someone whose understanding of reality had just been fundamentally challenged.
"Unknown, sir.
Our sensors indicate they've somehow installed massive gravitational manipulation devices throughout the lunar core.
They're using their own satellite as a mobile defense platform."
The situation continued to deteriorate for the invasion fleet.
Human weapons, now supercharged by absorbed Zephyrian firepower, began targeting the alien ships with devastating accuracy.
But these weren't clean, efficient kills designed to disable and capture valuable technology. The human weapons seemed designed with a single principle in mind: maximum psychological impact. Ships didn't just explode, they were systematically dismantled, piece by piece, their crews given ample time to send distress signals before the final blow. When the humans did destroy a vessel outright, they did it with massive overkill, using enough firepower to vaporize something 10 times larger. The message was clear: we're not just defending ourselves, we're making a statement. Admiral, his communications officer called out, we're receiving another transmission from the human leadership. Put it through. This time, the screen showed a different human, a woman in military uniform with graying hair and eyes that seemed to hold a dangerous amount of amusement. Hello, Admiral, she said pleasantly. I'm General Morrison, and I'm what you might call Earth's Director of Aggressive Negotiations. I hope you're enjoying your visit to our solar system so far. Zexai said nothing, but his mandibles clicked involuntarily. Now, I know what you're thinking, the general continued. You're wondering how a primitive species like humanity managed to develop technology that's giving your advanced fleet such a hard time. The truth is, we're wondering the same thing. But I've got a theory. She leaned forward slightly, her smile never wavering. You see, we humans have this peculiar habit of getting very creative when someone tries to kill us. Throughout our history, every major technological leap has been driven by war, competition, or spite. Someone told us we couldn't cross the ocean, so we built boats. Someone told us we couldn't fly, so we built airplanes. Someone told us we couldn't split the atom, so we built nuclear weapons. We're contrary like that. So when you showed up and demanded our surrender, well, let's just say you provided excellent motivation for our scientists and engineers. Amazing what humanity can accomplish when someone gives us a really good reason to innovate. The general's expression grew more serious. But here's the thing, Admiral. We don't actually want to destroy your entire fleet. That would be wasteful, and, despite what you might think, we're not a cruel species. We just want you to leave. Immediately. However, and now her smile returned with a distinctly predatory edge, if you insist on continuing this invasion, we're prepared to show you some of our other recent breakthroughs. Dr. Patterson, would you like to give our guests a small demonstration? The screen switched to show a man in a lab coat standing next to what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary telescope. Except this telescope was pointing at the Zephyrian fleet, and, when Dr. Patterson activated it, 3 enemy ships simply stopped existing. Not destroyed, not vaporized, they were simply no longer there, leaving behind small regions of space that seemed to bend light around themselves. We call it the existence adjustment ray, Dr. Patterson explained cheerfully. It convinces matter that it would rather be something else. Like dark matter, for instance. The process is completely painless, from what we can tell. The transmission switched back to General Morrison. Now, Admiral, I'm going to make you the same offer President Harrison made earlier, except with a slight modification. You can leave our solar system immediately, and we'll provide you with detailed medical care for your wounded and safe passage out of our space. We'll even throw in some of our coffee and chocolate as an apology for the misunderstanding. Or, and her voice took on a tone that made Admiral Zexai's blood run cold, you can continue this assault and discover what happens when you corner a species that once fought a global war because someone shot an archduke they'd never heard of in a country most of them couldn't find on a map. Your choice, but I'd recommend making it quickly. Dr. Patterson gets antsy when he doesn't get to test his new toys. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence once again. Admiral Zexai stared at the tactical display, watching as his fleet continued to suffer losses to weapons that shouldn't exist, deployed by a species that had been using chemical rockets just days ago. Around him, his officers waited for orders. The collective's protocols were clear: retreat was not acceptable against a primitive species. But the protocols had never anticipated a primitive species that could fold spacetime, move moons, and convince matter to stop existing. Admiral, his second-in-command said quietly, perhaps we should consider a tactical withdrawal. We can return with reinforcements, better preparation. The collective does not retreat from primitives, Zexai replied automatically, but even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Sir, with respect, are they still primitives if they're currently winning? It was a fair question, and one that Admiral Zexai was finding increasingly difficult to answer. By any measure of technology and military capability, the humans should have been overwhelmed within the first hour of engagement. Instead, they had turned the invasion into a demonstration of impossible weapons and casual threats to rearrange the fundamental nature of reality. But retreat would mean court-martial, disgrace, and, likely, execution. The collective did not tolerate failure, especially not failure against a species that was supposed to be easily conquered. "Signal the second and fourth battle groups," he said finally. "Tell them to jump to these coordinates immediately. If the humans want to escalate, we'll give them escalation they won't forget." As the Admiral gave orders for reinforcements, he tried to ignore the growing certainty that he was about to make his second terrible mistake of the day. Behind him, the tactical display continued to show human weapons installations coming online across their solar system, installations that hadn't existed a week ago but now seemed to be everywhere, all of them powered by technology that violated everything the collective knew about physics. Admiral Zexhai was beginning to understand that this was no longer a simple conquest operation. Somewhere along the way, it had become something much more dangerous, a test of wills between the collective's overwhelming force and humanity's apparently limitless capacity for spite. He was about to discover which was stronger. The arrival of the second and fourth battle groups should have been the moment when the tide turned in favor of the Zephyrian collective. 2,000 additional ships materialized at the edge of Earth's solar system, their combined firepower enough to crack planets and sterilize entire star systems. Admiral Zexhai felt a moment of relief as the massive reinforcement fleet began moving toward Earth. Finally, he thought, enough firepower to overwhelm whatever impossible defenses the humans had cobbled together. He was about to learn that when dealing with humans, enough firepower was a concept that required constant revision upward. "Admiral," his sensor operator called out, "I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the human solar system. Not just on Earth, on every planet, every asteroid, every piece of space debris larger than a shuttlecraft." "That's impossible. We've had this system under surveillance for months. There were no installations on the other planets." "Sir, they appear to have weaponized everything. The gas giant they call Jupiter is reading as a massive fusion bomb. Their asteroid belt is showing power signatures consistent with a planetary defense grid. Even their outermost ice worlds are active with weapon systems." Admiral Zexhai stared at the tactical display with growing horror. In the space of 1 week, humanity hadn't just developed impossible technology, they had turned their entire solar system into a fortress. Every rock, every ice ball, every floating piece of debris had been converted into a weapon platform. "How?" he whispered. His question was answered when the human communications channel opened again. This time, the screen showed what appeared to be a workshop or laboratory, with a human male in coveralls standing next to a machine that defied easy description. It was part computer, part factory, and part something that seemed to bend reality around itself. "Hi there," the human said cheerfully, waving at the camera with a hand that was stained with what looked like machine oil and stardust. "I'm Dave, and I guess you could say I'm humanity's chief engineer of making things work better. Sorry about the mess, we've been pretty busy this week." He gestured to the impossible machine behind him. "This is what we're calling the Universal Constructor. Turns out, when you're really motivated and stop worrying about things like conservation of energy and the fundamental laws of physics, you can build some pretty neat stuff. This little baby can take raw materials like, say, asteroids, ice, cosmic dust, whatever, and turn them into whatever we need. Weapons, shields, more universal constructors, really good coffee makers, you name it." Dave's grin widened. "We've been building them all week. Got about 50,000 of them running now, turning every piece of junk in our solar system into something useful. It's been like the galaxy's most violent home improvement project." The transmission switched to show a time-lapse video of the solar system over the past week. Admiral Zexhai watched in fascination and growing dread as tiny machines spread from Earth like a virus, landing on asteroids and planets and immediately beginning construction. Within hours, barren rocks were bristling with weapon installations. Gas giants developed massive ring structures that pulsed with energy. Even the sun itself sprouted what could only be described as solar collection arrays of impossible size. "The thing about humans," Dave continued, "is that we're really good at two things: breaking stuff and fixing stuff. Sometimes we do both at the same time. When you guys showed up and threatened to take our planet, well, that gave us a really clear goal for both skill sets. So here's what we've built for you this week: a solar system-wide defense network powered by our local star, constructed using self-replicating machines that can turn literally anything into weapons or shields. Oh, and we figured out how to make black holes on demand. That was Tuesday, I think. Been a busy week. Admiral Zexai felt his carapace beginning to shake. This cannot be possible. But the tactical display didn't lie. His sensors were detecting weapon systems throughout the solar system, powered by energy sources that shouldn't exist, built with technology that violated every known law of physics. Humanity had somehow turned their entire star system into a weapon pointed directly at his fleet. Admiral, his communications officer said quietly, "We're receiving a transmission from Collective High Command." Put it through. The screen showed Supreme Admiral Kethval, the highest-ranking military officer in the Collective. His presence on a communication channel meant that this operation had the attention of the very highest levels of government. Admiral Zexai, Kethval's translated voice carried the cold authority that had conquered star systems. "Explain to me why a 3-day operation against a primitive world has required the deployment of our 2nd and 4th battle groups." "Supreme Admiral, the humans have proven more resourceful than anticipated. They appear to have developed significant defensive capabilities." Defensive capabilities? Kethval's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or irritation. "Our intelligence reports indicated they were barely capable of chemical propulsion. Are you telling me they have somehow become a threat to the combined might of 3 battle groups?" "Sir, I recommend we reassess our approach to this system. The humans have demonstrated technology that exceeds our current understanding of physics. They have enough." Kethval's interruption carried the weight of absolute authority. "You have 48 hours to complete this operation, Admiral. After that, I will personally arrive to take command. And I will be bringing the first armada with me." The transmission ended. Admiral Zexai stared at the blank screen, his mind racing. The first armada was the Collective's ultimate weapon, 10,000 ships, including the Worldbreaker-class vessels that could shatter planets with single shots. If Kethval brought the first armada to Earth, it wouldn't be a conquest anymore. It would be extermination. But, before he could contemplate the implications, alarms began blaring throughout his ship. "Admiral," his tactical officer called out, "we have a problem." "Multiple problems. The humans are launching some kind of coordinated strike." The main display showed the impossible: simultaneous weapon discharges from every corner of the solar system. Plasma beams from Jupiter's weaponized atmosphere, particle cannons from the asteroid belt, and something from the Sun itself that registered as a concentrated solar flare with the approximate energy output of a small supernova. But, instead of targeting the Zephyrian fleet, all of these weapons were aimed at empty space between Earth and the alien ships. For a moment, Admiral Zexai allowed himself to hope that the humans had simply missed with their impossibly powerful weapons. Then, space itself began to change. The weapons fire converged on a single point in space and began to form something that couldn't be described in any language. It was a structure that existed in more dimensions than the 3-dimensional universe normally allowed, a construction that seemed to fold reality around itself like origami made from the fundamental forces of creation. "What are we looking at?" Zexai asked his science officer. I don't know, sir. Our sensors can't properly interpret what they're building. It appears to be some kind of spatial manipulation device, but the energy readings are off our scale. Whatever it is, it's drawing power directly from their star." As they watched, the impossible structure began to stabilize. It looked like a gate, or perhaps a lens, hanging in space between Earth and the Zephyrian fleet. And, through that gate, Admiral Zexai could see something that made his blood freeze. Ships. Thousands of ships. But not human ships, and not Zephyrian ships. These were vessels of a dozen different designs, some familiar, some completely unknown. And all of them were moving toward the gate from the other side. "Admiral," his communications officer said in a voice barely above a whisper, "we're receiving a transmission. It's from the humans, but it's also from... I'm not sure how this is possible." "Put it through." The screen showed President Harrison again, but this time he wasn't alone. Standing behind him were representatives of what appeared to be multiple alien species, some humanoid, some decidedly not, all of them looking directly at the camera with expressions that ranged from curious to openly hostile.
"Admiral Zexhai," President Harrison said, "I'd like you to meet some friends of ours."
It turns out that when you start broadcasting on all galactic frequencies about how you're planning to conquer a planet, other species tend to take notice. Especially species that have been conquered by you before. One of the aliens stepped forward, a tall, crystalline being that seemed to refract light as it moved.
When it spoke, its voice chimed like breaking glass. "Admiral," it said, "I am High Resonance Kefli of the Varangian Republic in exile. My people remember the Collective's generous offer of surrender. We remember how you relocated our population to your labor camps.
We remember how you strip-mined our worlds and called it civilization." Another alien, this one resembling a massive bear crossed with an octopus, stepped up beside the Varangian. "I am Warsinger Thakai of the Ursine clans. The Collective taught us that resistance was futile.
The humans have taught us otherwise."
More aliens appeared on screen, each representing a species that had been conquered by the Collective.
Dozens of them, all standing united with humanity.
"You see, Admiral," President Harrison continued, "when we started developing impossible technology overnight, we got curious about whether we were the only species this had happened to. So we sent out some messages.
Turns out, we weren't alone.
Every species you've conquered has been experiencing the same thing, sudden breakthroughs in technology, weapon systems that work perfectly despite violating known physics, defensive systems that exceed anything they thought possible. It's almost," he said with that distinctly human smile, "like the universe has decided that the Zephyrian Collective has been the neighborhood bully for long enough." Through the space gate, the combined fleets of dozens of previously conquered species began emerging into Earth's solar system. Ships that had been hiding in deep space, in asteroid fields, in the spaces between stars, all of them equipped with technology that mirrored humanity's impossible breakthroughs. "So here's the new offer," President Harrison said. "You can withdraw from our solar system immediately, and we'll pretend this unfortunate incident never happened. Your ships will be allowed to return to collective space, and no further action will be taken. Or," and now his voice carried the weight of not just humanity, but dozens of angry species who had been waiting decades for this moment, "you can stay and discover what happens when you give oppressed peoples the tools they need to fight back." Admiral Zexhai looked at his tactical display and saw his worst nightmare made manifest. His 3 battle groups, powerful enough to conquer most civilizations, were now outnumbered 10 to 1 by ships equipped with impossible technology and crews who had very personal reasons for wanting the Collective destroyed.
"Admiral," his first officer said quietly, "your orders?"
For the first time in his 43-year military career, Admiral Zexhai faced a decision that could not be resolved through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. The Collective's doctrine had always been simple: overwhelming force applied ruthlessly until the enemy surrendered.
But that doctrine assumed the enemy would eventually recognize their limitations.
Looking at the combined fleets of humanity and the Collective's former victims, Admiral Zexhai realized that some enemies simply didn't believe in limitations. "Signal all ships," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of defeat.
"Immediate withdrawal from this system. Set course for collective space, maximum speed." As the Zephyrian fleet began its retreat, President Harrison appeared on screen one final time. "Admiral," he said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle, "for what it's worth, you made the right choice.
We may be stubborn, vindictive, and apparently blessed with impossible technology, but we're not monsters. Take your people home, tell your superiors that Earth is under the protection of the Free Alliance now, and maybe find a hobby that doesn't involve conquering innocent planets."
"And, Admiral?
Next time you meet a species that tells you to go F*** yourself, maybe listen to them."
The transmission ended. As the last Zephyrian ship disappeared into hyperspace, Earth's impossible defenses began to power down.
The weaponized solar system slowly returned to its normal, peaceful appearance, though Admiral Zexhai suspected that appearances could be very deceiving where humans were concerned. Behind Earth, the spacegate began to collapse, but not before the combined fleets of the Free Alliance had made their own jump to hyperspace, heading toward other collective territories where other primitive species were waiting for liberation. In the end, the collective had been right about one thing: the operation had taken exactly 3 days. They had simply been wrong about which side would be doing the conquering. Admiral Zexai's final report to Collective High Command was remarkably brief: mission status, failed. Recommendation: do not engage humans. Do not engage anyone allied with humans. Do not even look at human space without written permission, and a very good apology. The report also included a personal note: Supreme Admiral, I respectfully request immediate reassignment to the farthest possible position from human space. Preferably in a different galaxy. It was a request that would soon be echoed by military commanders throughout collective territory, as news spread of the day that humanity had taught the galaxy a very simple lesson: some species are just too stubborn to conquer, and, when you give them impossible weapons, the real impossibility is expecting them to use those weapons reasonably. The Free Alliance would go on to liberate 17 star systems in the following months, each victory powered by technology that shouldn't work but somehow did, operated by species who had learned from humanity that the universe seemed to favor the underdog, especially when the underdog was too angry to accept defeat. And, somewhere in a bunker beneath Colorado, Dr. Sarah Chen was finally having a good day, watching as her impossible shields powered down smoothly for the first time in 15 years of research. Sometimes, she reflected, the best scientific breakthroughs came not from understanding why something worked, but from being too desperate to care about the reasons why it shouldn't.